Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa. I'm James Creedon. Here are our headlines from across the continent this evening. In Ethiopia, over 1,000 people have been evicted from their homes in Addis Ababa over the past few weeks. Amnesty International has criticised the authorities, saying hundreds of families are now on the streets in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Traffic jams are stretching to some 30 kilometres at border crossings between Kenya and Uganda. Health checks on truck drivers are seeing massive backlogs in traffic, all in a bid to stem the contagion. And South Africa has lost a legend. The activist Denis Goldberg, who fought alongside Nelson Mandela to end apartheid, has died at the age of 87. Thanks for watching. Now we start in Ethiopia, where the municipal government of Addis Ababa has demolished dozens of homes belonging to day labourers over the past 3 weeks. Now this, in the midst of the COVID-19 epidemic, has left at least 1,000 people homeless. Now many of those affected had also lost their jobs due to the economic fallout of the crisis. Amnesty International and other organisations have denounced what they call forced evictions. For more on that, here's Maria Gat Niculescu.
After their homes were destroyed, families found shelter under plastic sheets, but many of them have to hide in fear of the police, who are repeatedly asking them to leave the grounds. The last evictions were reported mid-April, after the state of emergency was declared to fight COVID-19. To protect themselves from heavy rains, some found refuge in neighbors' homes, but others have been sleeping in the cold. Amnesty International denounces what it calls inhuman actions amid an ongoing pandemic.
Forced eviction or demolition should not take place at a time which is very inconvenient for the victims. Right now, as you know, the COVID situation has created a lot of uncertainties, and people are not having their livelihoods cannot win their livelihoods in a normal way, and it has affected the income of people.
According to authorities in Addis Ababa, the evicted families do not formally own the land, but people we spoke to assure that they acquired the land legally. In any case, Amnesty International says the legal procedure for evictions was not followed.
What the government should know is that whether they are informal structures or squatters, there is a procedure to be followed. They should be consulted, they should be given prior notice, and the government, as much as possible, should give them viable options so that the people can have better and adequate housing.
The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission asked for a moratorium on evictions, but the city mayor says they will continue invoking the fight against land grabbing.
Now, staying in East Africa, strict border controls are being carried out between Uganda and Kenya. Massive traffic jams have formed at the border as a result. Trucks are backed up, waiting to be processed at the Malaba border crossing in particular. And it's all in a bid to ensure that this busy crossing does not become a factor in COVID-19 contagion. Laurent Berstecker has more.
A motionless line of lorries stretching over 30 kilometers. For these truck drivers waiting to cross into Uganda, time has almost come to a standstill.
Inaenda pole pole sana kwa sababu sasa ni siku ya tatu tangu tuingia hapa boda.
Kukunywa chai hakuna, chakula hakuna, hata mahali pa kwenda choo hakuna. Haya, kuna watu hata utakuta majangili wengine wanataka usiku wanataka kuiba diesel.
Once they get to the border, the drivers must comply with a series of screenings and provide a saliva sample to be tested for COVID-19, a process which takes another 24 hours. And even if they're allowed into Uganda, they're forbidden from stopping over in hotels, meaning most of them have to sleep in their trucks. A painstaking series of measures which Ugandan authorities say are necessary to control the spread of the coronavirus.
The best would have been to close the borders, but Uganda, being a landlocked country, we cannot do that. That's why we are investing a lot of money to screen every truck driver that is coming to Uganda.
A landlocked country and a busy trade hub in East Africa, Uganda has had no choice but to keep its borders open despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet authorities are determined to take as little risks as possible, much to the despair of Kenyan truck drivers.
Now, in recent times, Africa has been at the forefront of a new wave of financial technology startups. A majority of Africans don't have bank accounts, which has left a space for companies like M-Pesa in Kenya to allow users pay bills using their mobile phones instead. Now, that's just one example of how financial technology has disrupted traditional financial services on the continent. But like every sector, the so-called Fintech economy has also been impacted by COVID-19. Now, earlier we spoke to Jake Kendall. He's director of a digital financial services innovation lab. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about the sector.
The digital economy players, financial services startups, e-commerce players in Africa we're in the process of creating a new digital economy for a part of the world that's really mostly been used to transacting and doing things in cash. And so there was a lot of excitement and optimism building this whole new set of products and banking technologies. And that whole world has been kind of upended at this point because, as I said, a lot of the African economies are really much more based on cash than, say, the European economies, where a lot of people pay already. We're used to paying with credit cards or phones or what have you. And so that's had ripple effects through the entire economy and, of course, through the sector of technology startups who are trying to work in that area. A lot of the governments across the continent have been enacting all kinds of special policies in this area. Some of them have reduced for example, the amount of identity documents and sort of bureaucracy you need to open a bank account or a financial account. Some of them have reduced fees on transfers and other financial transactions. Some of them have even had holidays for credit reporting so that people who fall behind on a debt or something like that aren't penalized during the crisis. A lot of them have raised the transactional volume caps for certain kinds of mobile money type payments. And you've seen people, use right up to the new cap. So there's clearly sort of a big latent demand for these digital payment technologies that do exist and that are already being used. So some of those government policies have started to promote that stuff for sure. And a lot of the financial technology companies themselves are trying to jump in and fill that gap, helping people do transactions digitally and also helping the governments who are trying to put money into the economy get that money out in a digital form to the whole population.
In Central African Republic, at least 25 people were killed and 50 others were injured in clashes in the northeast of the country. Most of the dead were civilians. The clashes were triggered around the central market in the town of Ndele, with the cause unknown for now. The region is, however, confronted with frequent inter-ethnic clashes between the Gula and Runga peoples. Libya's UN-recognised government in Tripoli has rejected a truce that was called by Commander Khalifa Haftar, who controls the east of the country. The ceasefire had been unilaterally declared for the holy month of Ramadan, but Tripoli says it does not trust the announcement made by its Benghazi-based rival. Haftar's forces launched an offensive on the capital in April of last year, with several flare-ups since then, in particular last month. Now let's take a listen to the spokesman of the self-proclaimed Libyan National Army loyal to Khalifa Haftar.
تعلن القيادة العامة للقوات المسلحة عن وقف جميع العمليات العسكرية من جانبها وأن أي اختراق لوقف العمليات العسكرية من قبل الميليشيات الإرهابية يكون الرد فوري وقاسي جدا.
The South African anti-apartheid activist Denis Goldberg has passed away at his home near Cape Town. He was 87 years old. Goldberg was a major figure in the now ruling party, the African National Congress. He stood trial alongside Nelson Mandela, and his struggle to bring apartheid to an end saw him spend 22 years behind bars. Caroline Dumais and Sam Brad-Peace have more.
It was here at his beloved home in Hout Bay, some 30 kilometres from Cape Town, that anti-apartheid activist Denis Goldberg passed away. He was afflicted by lung cancer and a heart condition. His neighbours were the first to get the news. Among those in shock, this young man.
That is basically like a celebrity, a well-known person in the community. So yeah, they really adored him basically. We saw the mortuary van. My father was standing, and as the vehicle passed, we just like give a soldier salute. Just to honour.
As the local community and the country mourns, Mr. Goldberg's wife agreed to speak with France 24.
He tried to live up to that message of dedicating his life with purpose to upliftment, not only for himself but for others and for everybody.
Mr. Goldberg spent much of his life fighting racism. At the 1964 Rivonia trials, he was the only white man to be sentenced, alongside prominent figures like Nelson Mandela. He would spend the next 22 years in prison. In later life, he relentlessly called out corruption in the ANC, but remained proud to have inspired young progressives.
No matter how much the political organization, the ANC, collapses and defies its own history, these young people are upholding that history and those values. And leaders don't live forever. It's got to be from generation to generation.
An art lover and generous philanthropist, Denis Goldberg has left his house to the community for use as a cultural centre.
May he rest in peace. That brings us to the end of this edition of Eye on Africa. Thanks for watching.